Whistling 5 Anarchic Productions proudly presents Stumpy Sanderson's 1970s stories, as told by Andrew Brammer. Hello and welcome. The story you are about to hear is written and told using its original source materials, scribblings and scratchings from the scrawls of Stumpy, found within Stumpy Sanderson's time capsule, which was buried in 1979 and then unearthed in 2019. The story is told in the first person, as I, just like Stumpy, witnessed at first hand the momentous events which it recounts. So let's park up our rally choppers and tomahawks and take a ride back to 1970 for the 64 Legs of Creeping Gilbert. The descent into final and utter unhinged madness is a terrifying journey to witness. But this short account will hopefully give some insight into how such an awful degeneration can occur. Looking back, why oh why did Miss Escher, our well-meaning and dreamy, caftan-wearing hippie teacher with red frizzy hair and Dr. Scholl sandals, say that for our class speeches we could work and present in pairs? Why oh why did she say we could speak about whatever subject we wanted? And why oh why did she say the prize for the best speech would be awarded to not the best or most interesting speech, but to the most memorable? With these primed seeds sown by Miss Escher, the roots of the horrors that were to ensue were to sprout. Now, Miss Escher was of the view that giving speeches and presentations in front of the class was character building, as well as providing intellectual stimulation and interest in subjects we may not normally get to hear about. And when she gave us 2 weeks, including valuable class time, as well as our own time, to put together speeches of up to 10 minutes long, where we would be working and then presenting in pairs, and could pick any subject we wanted, Stumpy Sanderson and I were both as thrilled as anyone at the prospect. Particularly as we intended to give our joint talk on the TV programme Catweasel. Others in our gang were equally as excited. Gordon Sputnik Mahoney and Bendy Henderson planning to speak about the Dinky toys from the Jerry Anderson TV series Captain Scarlet and the Mysterons, and Smiler Morton and Gorp Alsop on the benefits and enjoyment of smoking. To be fair to Miss Escher, and whether it was the announcement that there would be a prize, or the fact that this whole endeavour gave us something of real interest to get our teeth into, for the next 2 weeks, our class was a hive and buzz of activity, and we had rarely seen such interest and hard work being put in, even by notorious miscreants. But there were 2 boys in our class, 2 very strange and unhinged oddities indeed, who, unbeknown to us, were to use this speech-making opportunity to unleash their warped thinking on us all. These 2 boys were Creeping Gilbert Hay and his silent sidekick, Austin Blythe. 2 very peculiar, oddball characters indeed. Gilbert Hay, a creepy and amorphous, blob-like creature with kiss-curled hair, large sage-coloured bug eyes, and an unnerving practice of finishing some of his sentences with a high-pitched tee-hee-hee, and his mortician accomplice, Austin Blythe, an unsettling creature with a waxwork face, insectoid eyes, and a topping of oily hair. From the very first time we laid eyes on this sinister and nauseous pair, we had thought them to be not quite right, and their very odd practices, which included such delights as biting the heads off the 0-0 gauge airfix soldiers that many of us often brought into school, had signalled to us from very early on they were characters to be avoided. But even more reason, all us boys always tried to give Hay and Blythe a wide berth, was primarily due to what they called their mind experiments, which they conducted at play and dinner times, either in the playground or on the small grassed area at the end of the school. These experiments involved Hay and Blythe capturing and then subjecting various weak and unsuspecting individuals to a variety of mental experiments and torments, cruelties which Hay would inflict, whilst Blythe would register and record in a large notebook the results of how long the victims had managed to withstand the agonising suspense and terror they had been subjected to. One of the worst of these cruelties had been when Stapleford the name-caller, in the full glare of the sun at the height of the later-than-normal wasp season, had been made to sit in an outside litter bin and was forced to hold a melting and unwrapped bar of bar 6, whilst swarming wasps flew all around him. Having to sit as still as a statue, it was only when the bell for afternoon lessons had sounded that a relieved and exhausted Stapleford was finally able to climb out of the bin, drop the chocolate bar, and flee unstung from the angry wasps. Avoiding and evading Hay and Blythe for these experiments was easier said than done. For if you were one of the unlucky individuals to be selected by them, you had no chance of evading them, due to the blob-like form of Gilbert Hay, who, like some horrific sci-fi film monster, would relentlessly pursue you on the playground and then finally corner and smother and suffocate the very life out of you. Those who did bravely try to fight back simply saw their ineffectual punches disappearing into Hay's vast stomach, whilst Blythe would creep behind the tiring puncher and conclusively snare them. Luckily, both Stumpy and I, due to a combination of our speed of thinking and the evasive speed which our small statures gave us, had been able, to date, to evade and avoid being captured by this loathsome pair. But it was Hay and Blythe's weird collection of insects which represented the most abnormal of their activities. For when they weren't engaged in their mind experiments, they spent their time at play and lunchtime, after school and at weekends, not playing football or war like the rest of us, but instead collecting slimy and large, creepy crawling insects and putting them into labelled jars with air holes in their lids, which Hay carried about in his duffel bag. Their collection included, amongst other creatures, such monstrosities as jars of blowflies, woodlice, centipedes, and earwigs. These jars alone were enough to strike terror into the hearts of many a pupil, and none of us dared tell any of the teachers for fear of ourselves being punished by Hay and Blythe and being snared for one of their mind experiments. And another why oh why here. Why oh why did Stumpy Sanderson and I pay such little attention to seeing Hay and Blythe on the day before the planned speeches, as we passed Gilbert Hay's creepy house whilst we were going up the rec to play football, enter Hay's dad's green wooden doored garage with a large black jar? And why oh why did Stumpy and I not heed the warning when Stumpy shouted out to them as they were entering that dark and foreboding garage, "What have you got planned for tomorrow, Hay? Something odd, I suspect." The chilling answer should have prepared us.
"Oh, don't worry, Sanderson. We are going to deliver something truly unforgettable. Something memorable all of you will remember for the rest of your lives."
And with that, he gave his trademark tee-hee-hee. So, it was now the day of the speeches themselves, and proceedings were actually going quite promisingly. Mine and Stumpy's presentation on Catweasel was generally well received, whilst Smiler and Gawper's speech about the delights of smoking, although generating much mirth, did cause even the liberal Miss Escher to intervene, when Smiler lit up an unfiltered capstan as a demonstration. Some of the speeches attracted their fair share of boos and yawns, with some even snoring from the back. And it was probably safe and fair to say, as the session neared its end, that any one of the girls' teams was probably in first place. But now, all the presentations were finished, apart from the last pair, Gilbert Hay and Austin Blythe. And when Miss Escher announced they would have an extra 5 minutes, which they had requested to prepare their table, we shifted in our wooden chairs, in a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. What bizarre and warped treats had they planned for us? Our inquisitiveness was further pricked when they both put on David Nixon Jr. magicians' cloaks and hats, and, with the table they had stealthily prepared now being covered by a black, bulging sheet, Miss Escher introduced them.
"And now, class, please give a warm hand to Gilbert and Austin with their speech entitled, 'What's in the Jars?'"
And with that, this gruesome twosome took centre stage. "I don't like the sound of this," said Stumpy, and I had to agree. Standing shapelessly in front of us all, Hay announced,
"Now, everyone, my trusty assistant here, Mr. Austin Blythe, will reveal our collection of jars, and what we would like is a volunteer to put their hand in a selected jar and then guess what is in it. If that person then guesses correctly, they can keep the prize."
At this, and with a sinister swish, Blythe pulled in one movement the sheet covering the table, revealing 6 large jars, all painted in a different colour so that you couldn't see the insides. The class was transfixed. Even though everyone thought this pair were a couple of weirdos, we were all hypnotised by Hay's mesmerising tones and were goggle-eyed at the mystery and temptation of what prizes could be in those 6 large jars. This was going to be like a bizarre version of Russian roulette. Despite Hay's slimy invitations and the thoughts of rewards from what was in those jars, people were still filled with apprehension and a deep mistrust of Hay and Blythe. And, as no one dared go first, it was Miss Escher who volunteered. Smiling thinly, she walked to the front of the class. Blythe picked the blue jar, which Hay had pointed to with his wand, and unscrewed the lid. Miss Escher put her hand in and rummaged around for long seconds. Hay asked inquisitively,
"Any guesses, miss?"
Miss Escher, her smile widening, answered.
"Is it a chocolate bar?"
Hay gleefully exclaimed,
"Bravo, Miss Escher! The prize is yours."
And with that, Miss Escher pulled her hand out, holding in it and revealing an Aztec bar. A liberating round of nervous laughter, a ripple of applause, and some faint cheers of relief echoed round the class.
"Ooh, look what Miss Escher has won. Now, who's next?"
goaded Hay.
"Come on, are we all cowards over what chocolate bars or sweets will be in there?"
At this, a row of small hands instantly shot up. The same process that Miss Escher had just undertaken then continued with the next 4 volunteers, whose initial nervousness, when they were actually presented with the painted jar selected by Blythe, quickly dissipated and was replaced with beaming faces when they all guessed correctly as to their jar's content, and in turn walked away with a bar of Applejack, a packet of Spangles, a box of sweet cigarettes, and a bar of Caramello. As each volunteer sat down with their prize, to ever more supportive and appreciative applause, in the space of 5 painted jars, Hay and Blythe were horrifyingly being transformed before us from monsters to benefactors in the eyes of the class. And now, there was only one jar left, a large black one. Stumpy and I still suspected foul play, as articulated when Stumpy hissed, "This is a trap." Quick as a flash, Hay caught this comment, and with his bug eyes honed in on us, duly threw down the gauntlet.
"Only one jar left, and the biggest one yet, surely containing the biggest prize. Why don't you have a go, Sanderson?"
Some in the class responded to Hay's encouragements. "Go on, Stumpy, have a go." But at this point, Smiler Morton, that great joker and friend of ours, with a small moon of a face, shrub-like hair, and a huge gap-toothed crescent of a never-ending smile, shot his hand up. And, probably because Smiler had previous with Hay and Blythe, Hay immediately picked him. Smiler went to the front. Blythe picked up the large black painted jar, unscrewed the lid, and offered the jar to Smiler, who, with a massive grin on his face, put his hand in. Smiler's hand had only stayed in that evil jar for 10 seconds or so before we knew something was terribly wrong. For we all saw that his very smile itself seemed to have taken on the frozen rictus of a grinning idiot who knows they have just done something even more stupid than usual. As Hay's blob-like face broke into a revolting smile, he asked,
"What do you think is in the jar, Morton?"
But, without even wishing to make a guess as to the jar's contents, Smiler slowly pulled his hand out, and on it was the largest black spider any of us had ever seen. What happened next was a whirlwind of pandemonium and chaos. For as someone from the back of the class blood-chillingly screamed in terror, Smiler, seeing the huge brute on his hand, jerked violently, knocking and spilling the jar from Hay's hand, resulting in the spider dropping to the floor. The large glass jar fell on the floor too, and then we saw them. Not just one spider, but 8 altogether. 64 hairy legs. As loud screams of dread, horror, and panic filled the classroom, these 8 hideous monsters scuttled and ran across the floor towards us all. Immediately, most of the class jumped up and stood on their chairs, whilst a couple of the braver boys actually hurled their chairs at the spiders, but missed by miles. Girls screamed, boys screamed, strong boys blanched. Many were simply paralysed with fear. Gentle Gerald fainted, whilst Miss Escher, also jumping on a chair, gathering sobbing and terrified wretches around her, shouted and shrieked at Hay and Blythe to get their spiders back in the jar. However, Blythe just stood motionless, admiring the carnage, a sinister smile on his face, whilst Hay was moving blob-like behind the 8-legged beasts, ushering and shooing them towards the screaming and terrified masses, and exclaiming insanely,
"Go on, my beauties, terrorise them. We're in control now. We're in charge now, Miss Escher, and we must have won the prize for giving the most memorable speech. Tee-hee-hee!"
With chaos all around, a few of us somehow desperately managed to get to the door and flee to the sanctuary and safety of the corridor. Gawper Alsop and Smiler Morton actually both carried on running straight to the bike shed, from where they purloined a couple of small bikes and rode all the way home. As Stumpy and I hurtled down that corridor, we heard from the screaming room a terrified Miss Escher frantically shouting to Hay and Blythe to keep back. And as the classroom's collective screams of terror grew louder and a gaggle of teachers and older pupils with serious and grim faces ran past us and into the classroom, above all the commotion, we could clearly hear the manic tee-hee-heeing of Gilbert Hay, who was clearly now completely deranged. Due to our escape, we didn't actually witness the concluding scenes in that classroom. But reliable sources told us that teachers used rulers, the sheet that had covered the table, and the empty jars to recover the spiders. For days, weeks, and years after the horrific events described, various exaggerated accounts were passed down as to the actual size and origin of those ghastly and monstrous spiders. Some said the brutes were as large as fists, whilst Gorp Alsop swore that one was as large as a small chicken. Others said they must have been bird-eaters from the Amazon basin. Stumpy and I, though, both being the voices of reason, deduced that the brutish arachnids that had run amok amongst us were actually huge and hideous garage spiders, which, unbeknown to us at the time, must have been collected when we saw Hay and Blythe entering that garage on the evening before the speeches. As for Hay and Blythe, well, that infamous day was the last we ever saw of them, either at our school or outside of it. And after the room had been cleared of spiders, some swore they saw those two being led away by senior teachers in what looked like straitjackets, victims of their own deranged descent into arachnoid madness. Fairly soon after, we all heard that both the Hay and Blythe families had moved to another part of Bedfordshire, and from all this, we could only assume that special arrangements had to be made for this very strange pair. Thank you for listening to this episode of Stumpy Sanderson's 1970s Stories. And don't forget to listen out for Stumpy and Gang's next adventure. For further information on all things Stumpy Sanderson, please visit www.stumpysanderson.co.uk. And you can also check out the Stumpy Sanderson's 1970s Stories YouTube channel. But before we saddle up again on our rally choppers and tomahawks, let's take a listen to the strange little song that was specially written by Stumpy to accompany this podcast's tale. This song is performed for us now by Stumpy Sanderson's 1970s acoustic archive. Let's rock!
Here comes Gilbert Hay, crawling like a spider, he'll creep up right behind you. Don't let him come your way. Or lend him any soldiers, he bites heads and shoulders. He's a strange one, and he's peculiar. Yeah, he's a strange one, and he's peculiar. Here comes Gilbert Hay, crawling like a spider, he'll creep up right beside you. Don't let him come your way. Near-ethic soldiers, bites heads and shoulders. He's a strange one, and he's peculiar. Yeah, he's a strange one, and he's peculiar. And he's an oddball. He's peculiar. He's an oddball. He's Gilbert Hay. Here comes Gilbert Hay, crawling like a spider, he'll creep up right beside you. Don't let him come your way. On near-ethic soldiers, he bites heads and shoulders. He's a strange one, and he's peculiar. Yeah, he's a strange one, and he's peculiar. And he's an oddball. He's peculiar. He's an oddball. He's Gilbert Hay. He's Gilbert Hay. He's Gilbert Hay. He's Gilbert Hay. He's Gilbert Hay.